It's the podcast with Alec, Jamie, and Carter, yeah.
Welcome to the How I Met Your Mother podcast for the episode, that was all right, entitled Unfinished. This is the third episode of the 6th season and the 115th episode of the series. My name is Alec Lev. With us today is Carter Bays, co-creator and executive producer, and Jamie Rhonheimer, co-executive producer and writer of the episode.
Hello.
Hello, Alex.
We've been looking at the big themes of these episodes. The idea that there's something that ties all the stories together. The name of this episode is Unfinished, so it seems as though that's kind of the theme of this episode. Where did that come from?
That is the theme of the episode. It's this is Carter speaking. We should probably say our names.
Yeah, we didn't do that last time.
Yeah,
that's all right.
We haven't been doing that. The name and theme of the episode is Unfinished, and this is it's two stories going on at once about two characters with unfinished business that eventually gets the better of them. We've got Ted, who, as we all know, left his career as an architect to become a professor. He sort of left in a bit of ignominy, and now he's realizing that he is not done being an architect, and he has to finish his masterpiece before he can move on. Meanwhile, Robin is still in the throes of getting over Don, her boyfriend from last year, and it's about her realizing that as much as it felt like a pretty, on TV, it was a nice, clean little, they parted ways and a nice song played, and that was the end of the episode. In reality, it's unfinished business for her. It's something that they didn't have the thing that you're supposed to have, where you realize you stay together long enough to realize you hate each other's guts or you want to get married, and they just ended, and it was unfinished. And so Robin is grappling with that too, and the way that manifests itself is her having to delete Don's number from her phone, and we sort of explore the idea of all those phone numbers that we keep in our phones that we of various pieces of unfinished business that we think we'll get back to, but we never end up getting back to. How was that? Was that good?
This is Jamie, the writer. One other thing that links the stories is the idea that sometimes you don't even realize you have unfinished business until something triggers it. And in this story, they both have a trigger at the same time. So they're sort of grappling with these similar stories at the same time and sort of informing each other, helping each other, talking about it, and then ultimately setting about a positive new course for themselves.
Was there talk about what your unfinished business is?
I know it came out of, like, for instance, the delete contacts thing. Definitely that came right out of everyone's real life. In fact, I think the thing where Marshall still has the name of the booker, he still has the phone number of the booker for his band. That's straight out of Craig Thomas's phone, because I know he's still got the booking agent's number for the place that he and I used to our little band used to play in New York.
I have two dead people.
Yeah. Oh, those are the worst. I do too. Yeah, my grandmother's phone number is in my phone as Malcolm and Janet Johnson, because my grandfather, God rest him, was and Abby's my sister's here. Say hi, Abby.
Hi.
And it's you're never gonna delete that. You can't. It's wow. This just really took a turn. Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's that definitely came out of real life.
And also on the Ted storyline, Ted's story is having to overcome the painful demise of this project that he loved the first time that he had an opportunity to pursue it. And that's something that I think a lot of us in the room have felt in our own careers in terms of doing a pilot. When the truth is, when you do a pilot, you invest your heart and soul into this thing, and it's very personal, and it's an expression of your own experiences, and oftentimes just the realities of the television business cause it to go through an incredibly gruesome and painful death in your arms. So that's something that I think we've all kind of put into this story from our own experiences.
Yeah, I think anyone who's worked very hard on something that hasn't panned out the way they wanted it can relate to it. It's definitely and it's also nice because it always felt like a story that we never we sort of like put Barney and Ted and Marshall working together at the same place, and Ted designing the building, and then by virtue of what that season had to be, we kind of had to take that away from Ted, because that season was all about Ted just experiencing loss after loss, and then ultimately the takeaway in the finale of that season 4, was that he had to go through all these losses in his life in order to gain this wonderful career as a professor that would lead him to the mother. That being said, it definitely felt like Ted being an architect is such a big part of who that character is, and it felt like unfinished business for us too. Like we want to see how he deals with this process of designing a building, adding his own little fleck of paint to the expressionist masterpiece that is the New York skyline. So that's this episode kind of set up a season-long story for Ted. This was the is it the Joseph Campbell thing, like the call to adventure? Like that's what this scene was. We actually in this something that got cut out that got cut out just because it would have meant nothing to anyone. Was initially we were gonna steal some of the dialogue from the scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark when Marcus comes to Indiana Jones in his college classroom and says, Abner Ravenwood has disappeared. We need you to find the Lost Ark. We're going to steal a lot of that dialogue, because that's what this episode was kind of the, Barney comes to his classroom and says, Ted, it's adventure time. Ted turns down the call at first.
You have the refusal of the call.
Yeah, the refusal of the call.
That's the next step.
You got to have the refusal of the call.
We're just looking for movies that we can take things from.
Yeah.
So, over the course of these podcasts, I think we're going to be talking more and more about the episodes, but then also really technically how a show gets written. So we talked a little bit in the first one about the breaking of the story, kind of the main beats of it. But then we have a writer of the episode, and then we have a room full of 6 or 10 or 12 people also who are writers, and I think for those who imagine a writer being just someone sitting there writing, that's a tad confusing. So as the writer of it, Jamie, how does it come to you, and then where does it go after you? And what is it? And while it's with you, what's happening there too?
So, as a group, we all generate the story together, led by Carter or Craig or both. And then once we reach the point where we sort of know what happens in each scene, it's then assigned to a writer like me. So at that point I took the ingredients, and I would go off and write like a 6 to 10 page outline, something in there that we then submit to the studio and the network. The studio is 20th Century Fox, and they each get the right to weigh in and give some notes. And then once we've gotten the notes and hopefully gotten their approval, I'll take everything and go off and write a first draft. Usually that comes in around 45 to 50 pages. Actually, sometimes a little bit more than 50, because it's good to sort of look at everything, and then sometimes, only when the draft comes in can you see, all right, here's some fat we can cut, here's some things we can tighten. So typically I'll turn in a first draft. Carter and Craig will both read it and weigh in and give some notes, and then I'll go off and write a second draft based on those notes. Then when I turn that in, it's ready for a full rewrite by the writing staff, sort of punching up jokes, fixing story things that don't work, and really getting it into shape for production. And then once production starts, all bets are off. It's sort of a bucking bronco that you sort of hope to tame over the course of the week. And,
Yeah.
And sometimes you're lucky and they stay really true to even what the first draft was. And then there are other times when you sort of learn and discover things that are working and aren't along the way, and there can be some changes too.
Yeah, I think every episode is its own animal in that way, and this episode especially, because there's a lot of real emotional stuff and there's a lot of delicate things that, this was one that I think a lot of the writing is going on the set. We're still sort of right now, as you're listening to this, we're still in the midst of shooting it, but it's very we try to collaborate with the actors, and we have such a talented bunch of people, a number of whom have now written their own screenplays and made their own movies, and so we it's fun being able to work on it with them and figure out the beats with them, figure out the moments with them, and sort of make everything, because episodes like this especially live or die by whether they feel real and whether the emotions are real, even if there's a lot of silliness involved, and there's certainly a lot of silliness in this episode, but it comes from a real place, like Jamie was saying earlier. Like it's about like when you work really hard on something and it falls through, do you start working on the next thing, or do you just curl up in a ball and hide somewhere? It felt very real, so we wanted to sort of really explore that with Ted and capture that.
So, Jamie, what is your writing process? Are you a Starbucks writer? Are you in your office writer?
I'm lucky in that I can work in different. I don't need to be in one set place. Typically I work just at home, but and I'll usually listen to music when I write and just crank things out, and so I'll be often in my corner of the apartment writing, and my wife will hear me laugh. I've pleased myself with something, but generally I just sort of crank it up. But that said, like I could write at a Starbucks. I think once I just sort of get into it, I just sort of disappear into it and just sort of have fun, and for me a key is just to spit out a first draft. Don't spend too much time like pondering specific jokes or lines of dialogue, but just get it on the page. And I find it's always so much easier for me to get it in shape once I'm working off of something.
I think that's true. We definitely feel like story is the most important thing, especially with this show, and like you have to write that non-funny draft first just to like get the story down, and then start making it funny. And ideally that non-funny draft will be funny just by virtue of it coming from the story. Like that's all the best comedy I think on the show comes from the story.
Yeah, and it's funny. Sometimes when you're writing that first draft to get the story right, oftentimes I find that the jokes you find in that draft, sometimes you'll just find a joke and this joke, we're going to shoot this joke. This joke is going to make it all the way through because it's so intrinsic to the story. That's a great feeling when that happens.
Yeah. We should. I had some interesting tidbits.
Please.
Can we add some interesting tidbits?
That's what we're here for.
Interesting tidbits. There's
I think we probably need a theme.
A theme song for interesting tidbits.
Interesting tidbits.
Yeah. Well, here's one interesting tidbit is that the theme of unfinished. This is a change of the subject a little bit, but we we use a piece of classical music in the episode, and that's Schubert or Schumann. It's Schubert. Schubert. It's Schubert.
Yeah.
It might be Schumann. I can't remember.
Someone call someone.
It's Schu. His friends call him Schu.
Schubert.
And Schubert. We used his unfinished symphony. That was the piece of classical music that we used.
Very nice. And you start off the first episode with the George Harrison music. You're talking about listening to music as you're writing. Is that? And you were telling me that just in general this season you felt like music was going to be a big part of things.
Absolutely. I think there's an emotional roller coaster coming up this season, and as we've been sort of planning out this, we talked in the last one of these that I did about planning out the whole season in advance and sort of knowing where all the various beats of the season will take place, and we. In doing that, I've been listening to it. You can tell that it's going to be an emotional season when like you're already planning what songs you're going to use in what places, and there's a lot of places for sad songs, a lot of places for happy songs, and so it's going to be just based on that alone, based on the iTunes playlist and I'm not saying that just to plug iTunes. We're
Yeah, it could be the Windows Media.
Could be the Windows. In fact, Windows Media is actually a much better player.
Easy. Well,
what? No,
easy.
I can't. No, okay.
They're all really good.
Sorry, they're all really good. No favorites, but just that non-specific media player playlist that I have. It's something that gets you excited about the season. Just knowing it. And that George Harrison song was kind of the. That whole album, in fact, I think is a big touchstone for the whole season.
All Things Must Pass.
All Things Must Pass by George Harrison.
I have one final question. Is there a character in television that has had more sex than Barney? I was discussing this with someone else. Sam Malone.
Blanche.
Sam Malone, Blanche Dubois. Blanche Dubois? No, that's from some play or something.
Rose Nyland, Blanche. I don't know.
I can't remember.
Blanche. Right.
Blanche.
Rue
Yeah.
McClanahan.
Was Fonzie having a lot of sex, or was he just cool? He might have just been cool.
He was off behind the scenes for sure.
I would say that there was one. Joey certainly did very well. I think currently on TV, I think he's only got one real contender, a very close second place, and that's Ted Mosby, because that guy gets around.
All right, thank you all. Thank you all for joining us for 603.
Thank you,
next
everyone.
week.
Next week.